But today we're talking about the quadratic formula. And a lot of people, they kind of forget sometimes like why you need the formula. We need it because we need the x-intercepts. You need to know when does the ball hit the ground, and you can't factor to find it. We have the graph, so actually we would probably just use the graph, but you're not always going to have a graph. So instead we need some other method of solving, and that's what this shows us, okay? So the formula, it looks very long, and it is. It starts like this. X equals, it's going to tell us what is the x equal, what are the x-intercepts. And it's going to be a fraction, and the fraction is kind of big, so I'm going to draw a nice long line like this. The bottom is not very complicated. It's just 2 times a. The top has a lot more to it. It starts with negative b. Does that look familiar to you right now? X equals negative b over 2a. Remember where we've seen that before? You just say it. Where was it? Yep, LOS. Good. So the quadratic formula has like the LOS in there. Negative b over 2a. Now, after the negative b, we need to do 2 things. We need to add and subtract. And the way we show that is like this. Plus or minus. And you don't need to know where this comes from or why it works. Today, you just need to know how to use it. It's plus or minus a square root. And inside the square root, we're going to go b squared minus 4ac. So to find the x-intercepts, we need to know a, we need to know the b, we need to know the c in our equations. And if you plug them into the formula, it can tell you where is this parabola going to cross the x-axis. Any questions so far? Any wonderings? Okay, so let's look at our example then. Sasha threw a ball that looked like this. Y equals negative 1.5 x squared plus 0.9x plus 2. The first step in the quadratic formula is actually the same as all the others, all the other solving things we've done. You want to make y equal 0. So let me actually erase the y and just make it equal to 0. Because we want to know the x-intercept. That's why we do it. Now, I'm going to need to use A, B's, and C's, which we've done in quizzes and we've done on homework. And for the quadratic formula, we're going to write it over here on the side. This is your first step. Let's figure out what A, B, and C equal. A is going to be negative 1.5. B is going to be 0.9. And C is going to be 2. So this is how we start Sasha's problem. If you were doing something with like rockets or airplanes or anything going through the air, you would still start it the same way. You have the formula and you identify A, B, and C. All right, those of you that like showing work in math, you're going to have a really easy time today. Those of you that don't like showing your work when you do math, you're going to have a tough time because with a quadratic formula, you have to go one step at a time. If you try to do more than one step, you're going to make a mistake and you're going to have to start it all over again. So it's really important that you follow all the steps that I'm going to show you, okay? So now that we have A, B, and C, our next step is to plug them into the formula. Everywhere I saw, I'll put it back up here. Everywhere I saw a B and an A and a C, I'm going to plug in the numbers. So it's going to have x equals, and there's a negative in front of the b, so it's negative 0.9 plus or minus the square root of 0.9 squared minus 4, and then the a and the c I put in parentheses. Negative 1.5 and a 2. Now don't forget, there's a fraction here. It's all divided by 2 times negative 1.5. Any questions on that step? Oops. Hold on, my screen sharing is gonna get. Let me re-share my screen. All right. Any questions on that step?
What does the quadratic formula help you find?
It helps. That's a great question. Like, why do you even need this? It helps you find the x-intercepts. So in this case, it would tell us how long was Sasha able to throw the ball in the air? How long before the ball hit the ground? We had a graph, but if you didn't have a graph, you'd have to use this. The quadratic formula shows you the x-intercepts. A lot of times we can find them just by factoring, which is great. Sometimes you can find them with the square root, which is great. If you can't, then you have to use the formula. Okay, now on my next step, I'm going to do 3 things. I want to square the 0.9. I want to multiply the stuff on the bottom. And I'm also going to multiply the stuff over here at the end. That's it. So it's going to look like this. X equals negative 0.9 plus or minus the square root. 0.9 squared, well, that's just going to be 0.81. So 0.81 minus 4. I don't do anything with the 4. I am going to multiply the 2 and the 1.5, which is negative, so I get negative 3. Divided by, we also have a negative 3 on the bottom. So that's step 3. And that's the important lesson today, is to know what are the steps when solving with the quadratic formula. For this next part, all I'm going to do is I'm only going to multiply the negative 3 times the 4. Okay? But I'm going to get a minus a negative. So really, this is going to be a plus 12 over here. So it looks like this. X equals negative 0.9 plus or minus the square root of 0.81 plus 12. All divided by negative 3. It's pretty crazy that a bunch of mathematicians like solved a bunch of quadratics and found this formula. That's pretty amazing. Okay, for the next step, I'm only going to do the things inside the square root. I'm going to add the 12 and the 0.81. So x equals negative 0.9 plus or minus the square root of 12.81 divided by negative 3. We're getting there. We're almost done. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with this plus or minus. We want to do negative 0.9 plus the square root of 12.81, but we also want to do it minus the square root of 12.81 because square roots have 2 answers, right? A positive and a negative. That's why we do a plus and a minus. So I split it into the 2 different things. One is going to be with the plus, the other is going to be with the minus. So I have x equals negative 0.9 plus the square root of 12.81 divided by -3. And then the same thing again, but with the minus. X is -0.9 minus the square root of 12.81 divided by -3. The nice thing about showing all these steps is one, you're less likely to make a mistake. And two, if you make a mistake, you can go back and figure out when it happened and fix it and then just go from there. If you don't show all your work, then you would have to start the problem all over again. And you don't want to do that. Now I'm going to use my calculator to help me with this next step. Let me deal with the one on the left first. In my calculator, I'm going to plug in exactly what I have there on the paper. I'm going to go -0.9 plus the square root of 12.81. And I want to see what that is, okay? So I'm going to have it solve it. And look at that. That's a irrational decimal. We're not going to round it. We're not going to do anything. You're just going to leave it there in your calculator because I now need to divide it by -3. Say, okay, so see how I did that? You plug in the top of the fraction, and then once you get to the answer, you divide it by whatever was on the bottom. Now, when I write this answer, because it's a decimal that keeps going on, I'm going to have to round it. And a good place to round is to the 100th. So I'm either going to leave that as a 9, I'm going to round it up. And if I look, the next number is a 3. So I'm going to leave it as a 9. So my x, the way I can show I rounded is by doing the squiggly equals. That means it's about equal to. X is about equal to -0.89. And that's what we saw in the graph. It didn't mean anything in our example because she started growing after that, but sometimes it does. You would use it for stuff. We have to do this other one though too. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to plug it in my calculator. I'm going to go -0.9 minus the square root of 12.81. And I see what that is. I don't round it. I don't do anything. I just leave it in my calculator. And I divide it by -3. Oh, wait, I made a mistake. Oh, I did plus again, huh? Oops, let me do it again. See, if you make a mistake, you go back, you fix it. -0.9 minus the square root of 12.81 equals, there we go, that looks better. I leave it in my calculator and I say divided by -3. Okay, I'm gonna have to round it again. After the 9 comes a 3, so I'm gonna leave it as a 9. So x is about equal to 1.49. You know what's funny? On the graph, it said that the x-intercept was 1.493, but look at the calculator. The x-intercept is really 1.493035. It keeps going. You wouldn't know that on the graph. So we're not going to write these as ordered pairs anymore. Okay, you know that it's an ordered pair. So instead, all we have to do is put the word or in between and then box our answers. That's how you use the quadratic formula to find the x-intercepts. That tells us Sasha, as a 2-year-old, can throw the ball into the air for about 1.5 seconds.